Hey gamers, this is Turkneimer, and today we have a special playthrough of Majora's Mask. This is all dungeons low percent. The goal is to beat all the 4 dungeons while obtaining as few items as possible. In this version of all dungeons, major glitches like SRM are allowed. Without SRM, this category currently requires 15 items. Now this already includes the 4 boss remains, so at the end of every dungeon you get a boss remain, and collecting the boss remains is also what per our definition counts as beating a dungeon. So per definition you already need to get at least 4 items. Now the question is what counts as an item and what does not. Our definition of low percent is actually related to our definition for 100%, and in Majora's Mask 100% you need to obtain everything that persists through Song of Time. So our low percent definition is that everything that persists through Song of Time, which is required for 100%, counts as an item. So stuff that counts is, for example, all the masks, art pieces, songs, but also things like having hit owl statues and entries in the Bomber's Notebook. And of course most of the seed items count, but there are also trade items which you can equip on sea like the other items, but they disappear when you play Song of Time. And thus they are not required in 100%, and thus they don't count towards our item count. Things that also don't count are those which you can only obtain with glitches. There's the hidden owl statue in West Clocktown, which you can reach and hit with glitches, and there are also 2 songs that you can obtain with SRM, Sun Song and Saria Song. Yeah, those also don't count. I made this LOTAD on the Dolphin emulator. That is an emulator for GameCube and Wii, and the version I used was the Japanese Wii Virtual Console version. So it is basically double emulation. The Wii Virtual Console was the official emulator made by Nintendo to run N64 games on the Wii, and I now use Dolphin to run a Wii game on PC to make this LOTAD. And as far as I am aware, this is the first LOTAD of Majora's Mask that used Dolphin. Usually people use BizHawk to emulate the N64 directly, but there are actually many glitches that would crash on N64 but work fine on Wii, and this run is full of those glitches. There is also a cool hardware glitch that I discovered a few years ago, and that glitch is only a thing on GameCube and Wii. Or I should rather say I rediscovered it. It actually turned out that the developer of the Wii Homebrew app knew about this bug the whole time, and they actually made use of it in early versions of Homebrew for some piracy protection, but I don't know the specifics about that. I will tell you more about it later, but I can tell you so much that it has been useful in Majora's Mask and also Ocarina of Time speedruns. And it is actually used in the current route of Ocarina of Time any percent. Yeah, also on that note, special shoutouts to Mr. Cheese. So this is the first LOTAD I ever made, and sometimes I felt like optimizing a little, sometimes I didn't. Text boxes should all be perfect, I hope, but yeah, there will not be a lot of super cool TAS style movement. I tried a little bit here and there, and there's a part at the very end that I think is quite entertaining to watch. But yeah, for the most part this is just a very technical run, and it's mostly just about demonstrating the concept of how to do a lot of stuff with very few items. So if you don't care much about technical details, you can just go ahead and skip to second cycle. Okay, but for real, I hope that everybody can learn something new from this LOTAD, and I will explain a lot of glitches and techniques on a more basic level, mostly stuff that is related to SRM, and I hope that at least the basic concepts are relatively easy to understand. However, I will also go into technical details a lot of times, and those details might not be easy to understand if you don't have at least some knowledge in computer science. But I think that there are probably some people who want to learn how SRM techniques work in detail, and specifically Light Node SRM is what we are mostly going to see. If you have some experience with Light Node SRM from Ocarina of Time, I can already tell you that it technically works the same in Majora's Mask, but in practice we achieve it quite differently. You might have noticed that even though we are on the Japanese version, we did not set up any special file name like you would in Ocarina of Time. One last thing I need to say in advance: there will be a section later in the run where there is so much happening back to back that it is impossible to explain everything right away. I will show a lot of stuff on the left side, mostly memory watches that show the current values of data in memory, and most stuff I will explain several minutes later. In some cases you will need to wait for the explanation like 20 minutes, but it is okay because there will be a lot of repetition. We will see a lot of the same stuff again and again, and so we will also see the memory watches again. And if you like, you can then go back and rewatch the earlier parts and then you see what all of that meant. We are farming some rupees here, and if you have seen a run of Defeat Majora with the latest route, you should already know where this is going. Unlike any percent, we will not get the nuts here. Not only would the nuts be an extra item, the any percent method of turning human would not actually be allowed in this category, because it uses arbitrary code execution. Low percent without any glitch restrictions and with only the goal of beating the game, so without beating the dungeons as we are about to, would probably only require one item. It would probably only require magic. You would still do the any percent ace, but instead of Deku Nuts you would get Mood Steer, and that is a trade item and therefore does not count towards the item count. Then the only question would be whether or not the glitched items you get on your C buttons count as items. You don't actually get them in your inventory, but you still get them on C, so it is not so clear if they count. If they count, we would need to do something different with the ace, but there could probably be figured something out to, for example, go to the moon directly instead of getting items. This is the infamous Happy Mask Salesman skip, often just called HMS. I like to call it HMS my head because I fail it all the time. Well, the pause menu is unfortunately a little glitched. It might not look like it, but we are actually walking towards the door to Clocktown. So there's a cutscene that is supposed to be starting, but by pausing we can delay it. In this game, for most cutscenes, the game only checks any other frame if it should be started, and pausing actually resets the relevant frame counter. So on the first frame after pause, the cutscene cannot start. So if we always only advance one frame at a time, the cutscene will never start. I'm sorry for the black screen on the pauses. There has been a bug on Dolphin that made the frame buffer for pauses not work properly. It has actually long been fixed, but for making the LOTAD I had to use specific settings, and apparently the fix doesn't work with that, or at least I didn't figure out the right settings. I didn't put too much time into this because there are barely any pauses in this run, so it's not really a big deal anyway. The last boss is actually coming up quite soon, so stay tuned for that. Our first goal in Clocktown is to get to day 3, and the fastest way of doing that is to go to Stockport Inn and listen to grandma stories. Unlike most speedruns, however, we just need to make it to day 3 and not night 3, so we don't need to dance with the scarecrow. And now that it is day 3, we will be doing the trick that made this whole route possible, the laundry pool clip. To make this trick work, we need to get into a very specific position and get a certain facing angle. Or that I'm actually using a setup here that I made for RTA speedruns. And now we do a Deku spin, and with just the right position, facing angle, camera angle and movement speed, we can clip through the wall and navigate our way into the loading zone. And now we can get Keaton Mask and priority mail. So, this laundry pool clip has been theorized for over a decade before it was finally found. I think probably every MM glitch hunter, myself included, tried to somehow clip in there. And in late 2023, Exodus finally found a way. This was one of the big holy grails of Majora's Mask. The holy grails that we have found so far are Moonwarp, Human in First Cycle with SRM, and now with Laundry Pool Clip we got Human in First Cycle without SRM. And here we have the last boss of the run. With the 10 pauses for HMS skip, that makes 11 pauses in total. And Keaton Mask is our first item, and as I said earlier, Priority Mail is a temporary trade item, and therefore does not count. Though, it will still be useful later on, so keep that in the back of your mind. Now to be able to turn human with Keaton Mask, we need one more item. The astute viewer might have noticed that we collected the Stray Fairy in Laundry Pool, so you should already know what the item will be. Now we are getting magic, our second item, and except for the boss remains, this is also our last item. So the total item count of this run will be 6 items. But how is magic helping us with turning human? So there are actually 2 ways to turn human with Keaton Mask. One of them requires magic, the other one requires Lens of Truth. Now the Lens of Truth method was actually used in the one cycle LOTAD, and its big advantage is that it works on every version. Its big disadvantage is, however, that it takes way longer to set up. If you haven't seen the one cycle LOTAD, I very much recommend watching that. The magic method makes use of a Japanese exclusive glitch. We got magic so we can play the Honey and Darling minigame. There is an interesting oversight of the developers in the Honey and Darling minigame on day 3. There are no item restrictions. It is as simple as that. During the minigame you can just use whichever item you like. And using a normal mask when transformed will just turn you human. And now we are heading towards Icana. I actually tried a little bit of cool movement here. It is in no way optimized, but at least it's a little bit faster than just walking. First we have a Hess here, a glitch that lets you preserve the pushback speed from rolling into damage. Next up we have the Infinite Sword glitch. We get that by interrupting a crouch step, in this case by shielding damage, and that gives us the ability to hover in mid-air, that we can use to get over the fence. And with another S we can clip through this rock here. And that is how we get to Graveyard. We will be in Graveyard for quite a while. This is now the main part of the run, the SRM section. There's a neat little clip here to get into the day 1 grave by just side hopping. Ignoring the bad movement, this clip can be kinda dumb sometimes. There is a lot going on in this section. The nice thing is that we will see more or less the same thing several times in a row. So I can explain one thing at a time. For now let's just watch what we are doing, and then later I will explain what exactly is even happening. So, the SRM solved the puzzle where we are normally supposed to light the torches. And that is how we can get Song of Storms without Deku Stick or fire arrows. Of course, we are not actually getting it, but why would we get Song of Storms? You know that the puzzle got solved is just a side effect of the SRM, or SRM actually does something with one of the torches. Also, you might have noticed that the boss are actually still in front of the door, and that is because we dropped the SRM too quickly for the cutscene to finish. There's a neat thing I found here. When you kill the last bat while standing in between the rooms in the tunnel, the chest will not spawn. We want the bats to be gone so they will not mess up the upcoming setup, but we need the bats later again, and as long as the chest doesn't spawn, the bats will be there the next time we load the room. We're now doing a position setup here, and there will be one position setup for every SRM we are doing. I will explain later what exactly those are actually done for, but for now you just need to know that we are setting up certain data in memory. Compared to the later position setups, this first position setup is actually quite different in 3 aspects. 1, it is the only one that we do in the grave. We will do all the other setups overground in the graveyard. 2, it is the only setup that we do after all the SRM shenanigans. For all the other SRMs, we will do the position setup before the actual SRM. And 3, I said we will manipulate certain memory, and that memory will always be some kind of position data. For the first setup, we use the position of whatever Link is holding. This is where the priority mail comes in handy. Using that item will make show Link it over his head, and for our purposes that counts as an item that Link is holding. And there's actually a place in memory where the position of the letter is temporarily stored. Well, if we didn't have the letter, we could also have picked up a pot, walked into the right spot and dropped the pot, but using the letter is much more convenient. We just waited for night in the grave because there's no night transition there, and we have to waste some in-game time anyway. And now we are doing a position setup in the graveyard. Since we need to waste time anyway, I did not make any effort of optimizing this part. For all position setups from now on, we will be using Link's position directly. And not just his coordinates, but also his facing angle. There's a really convenient method of storing this position and angle data, and that method is actually used in pretty much any category that allows pointer manipulation SRM. When a date transition happens, the scene reloads. And after it reloaded, the game needs to put Link to the same coordinates that he was at before. So before the date transition, the game just copies the position and angle data from Link to some other place in memory, and after the date transition, the game just copies them back to Link. There are, however, 2 problems with this method. 1, we cannot have another date transition because the moon would crash, and 2, loading another scene would actually lead to that memory to be overwritten again. That is because that position data at said memory address is not only used for Link respawning after a date transition, it is also used for void outs. You can actually try that yourself. After the scene reloaded from date transition, you can void by, for example, jumping out of bounds or getting crushed, or you can fall into water as Goron or burn as Sora or Deku. And you will see that you will respawn at the same coordinates as after the date transition. However, if you die, you will usually spawn where you first entered the scene. Or in some cases, you might respawn in a different scene, like when you died in a boss fight, you respawn at the start of the temple. That is because there is an extra set of respawn data in memory just for death respawns. There are actually 3 sets of respawn data. The first one is for date transitions and void outs, the third one is for death respawns, and the second one is a little bit special. It can have 2 different uses. One of those uses doesn't even apply to the Japanese version. On the North American and PAL version, they made a change to Song of Double Time, and when you use it to make it night, the scene reloads, and for the respawn, the second respawn dataset is used. On the Japanese version, the scene is not actually reloaded, so there is no data copied to the respawn dataset. The second use of this respawn dataset is for the respawn after the clock tower opening cutscene. The convenient thing about this respawn dataset is that it is not overwritten when you leave the scene, so we can go into the grave and Link's respawn data is still loaded. I will explain the other steps of the SRM later, but for now let me tell you what our first two SRMs actually achieve. The first one did seemingly nothing, but we actually used it to store some data to some memory address, and now the second one does basically the same thing. We store some data right before our data from the first SRM, and now we have set up 8 bytes in memory, and we can now use these 8 bytes for something. And now pay attention to the in-game time. It's 9 PM again. So those 8 bytes we did set up are actually still there. They did not get reset when we used them to revert time. And this means that we can revert time back to 9 PM every time we do SRM. And I hope that you like the clock tower opening cutscene, because we will be seeing it a few more times. So what will the next two SRMs do? These two SRMs will change the scene to where the blue orbs in the boss rooms take us. The first SRM will change all the blue orbs to take us to a Roto Arcana from the graveyard. So when we walk into the blue orb, it will look like we just left the graveyard. What's the point of walking to that place in particular? Well, it just had to be something close, because after the first 3 bosses, we will need to do some more shenanigans in the graveyard. And Roto Arcana from the graveyard was just the first thing I could figure out, so I stuck with that. This is also where that hardware glitch that I rediscovered is used. So the SRM technique we are using for all the SRMs in this run is the so-called Light Node SRM. I will talk more about it later. For now you just need to know what it allows us to do is to write 4 bytes of data to any memory address. Now we will be seeing the clock tower opening cutscene again in just a second, and you will see from now on this cutscene is a little bit glitched. I assume some properties for maybe the camera or something don't get reset until the end of the cycle. Anyway, there is one problem with the way we glitched the blue orbs. We overwrite the scene values that originally were set to Giant's Chamber, so instead of Giant's Chamber the blue orbs would take us to Arcana Road. The thing is that for every Giant's Chamber cutscene, or rather for any entrance in the game, there are 4 bytes in memory. The first byte is the scene value that we will set to Arcana Road. The second byte is the entrance number. We will set that to entrance 2, which is from the graveyard. And the last 2 bytes determine the scene transition, so which kind of fade out or fade in you get. And with 4 Giant's Chambers, that makes 16 bytes in total. But with Light Node SRM we can normally only write 4 bytes. That is, unless we write to uncached memory. Now I am in no way qualified to explain what exactly cached and uncached memory is, but it has to do with how the emulator organizes memory or something, I don't know. Anyway, in this game data in memory is usually set up in packs of 4 bytes. So for example, it would be normal to store 4 bytes to memory address 0, 4, 8, 12, 16 and so on. But if you write it misaligned, so for example to address 1, 5, 9, 13 and so on, and if you also write it to uncached memory, something interesting happens. Depending on the exact memory address alignment, the data will wrap around to the nearby memory, so that there will be written either 8 bytes or 16 bytes. On that note, shoutouts to the Dolphin developers who actually patched this glitch into the emulator. This LOTAD would not be possible without that. After we found the glitch, we realized quickly that Dolphin did not actually have it, so Riley wrote a bug report and they patched it. Well, mostly. I actually found another very specific application where you only write 1 byte to uncached memory, and if the write instruction in libs also writes with the word misaligned offset, then the outcome is interesting. But it's super specific. Anyway, I was actually talking about glitching the blue orbs. So, with one SRM we write 16 bytes, change all the blue orbs to take us to Arcana Road, and the other SRM, for which we are doing the position setup now, is used to change just the last blue orb again. I will not tell you yet where the last blue orb will take us, but if you have seen speedruns of all dungeons with Light Node SRM, you probably already know. So currently we are doing the setup for the fourth blue warp, and after that there will be two setups that will not do anything immediately. We will just set up some data for later, and I will tell you what that is about when we actually use it. And that means that there's finally some time to explain how SRM works. So the first thing we always do when we enter the grave is walking back and forth between the two rooms, wrecking pots, doing spin attacks. It might appear like some random actions. What we are actually doing there is the so-called actor heap manipulation, or heap manip for short. The actor heap is a section in memory where actors are loaded. Actually also some other things are loaded there, but we still always call it the actor heap. Now, an actor is usually anything that you can interact with, like for example the pots or the torches, but also enemies like the bats, and Link himself is also an actor, as well as some particle effects of the charged spin attack. So by breaking the pots, we can actually make the pots unload from the actor heap, and charging a spin actually adds the particles of the spin to the actor heap. On top of that, we can make all the actors of one entire room load or unload by crossing the load plane in between the rooms, which we are actually doing right now. So that black plane in the tunnel that makes it appear all dark is actually a load plane. Load planes like that are one way in which the loading and unloading of rooms can be handled in the game. The same thing usually happens when you use a door, so the stuff in the room you enter loads and the stuff in the room you leave unloads. Now by doing all these kinds of actions that I described, we can actually manipulate to which memory address actors load. The two actors that we care about is one of the pots and one of the torches. The pot I mean is the one close to the tunnel that we do the super slide with, which we will actually see again in just a second. So super slide is actually a quite complex glitch. Most of the times in speedruns it is just used for fast movement, but in SRM categories it is used quite differently. So, how does a super slide work? You can achieve a super slide by rolling into something that you can pick up, but then while picking it up, you shield damage. The most common way of doing this in speedruns is by using a bomb, because a bomb is something that you can pick up, but also a source of damage at the same time. Well, actually, it is more complicated than that. What really happens is, before shielding the damage, we already perform another glitch, grab storage. As the name suggests, it stores a grab on the actor that you try to pick up. There are several ways in which you can get grab storage. For example, you can take out sword, then go in front of the actor that you want to pick up, and then try to pick it up while shielding. You will see that you will just put away sword, but then you kinda get stuck in place. But once you let go of shield, you will pick up the actor. Interestingly, doing grab storage is also the first part of doing yet another glitch, ground jump. For that, you just need your shield to be hit after you got grab storage. Then your next backflip or side hop will instead be a jump upwards. For ground jump and super slide we have basically the same conditions. We need something to pick up and some source of damage. And that's why ground jumps are also usually done with bombs. Now, super slides are done by achieving grab storage out of a roll and then shielding damage at just the right time. If you shield the damage too late, you will just get a ground jump, but with just the right timing, you can maintain grab storage while being pushed back by the damage, and in that state, the pushback speed is actually preserved, which is why we keep sliding backwards. And because we still have grab storage, when we let go of shield, we will still pick up the actor. And this way we can pick up an actor while standing very far away from it. What we do to achieve SRM is basically picking up an actor, but after it unloaded. We get grab storage on the pot, then slide through the tunnel, crossing the load plane, the pot unloads, and then we let go of shield and pick up the pot. Or rather we don't, because the pot unloaded. The thing is, with grab storage, you usually cannot pick up actors after they unloaded. For example, when you do the super slide with a bomb, then the bomb explodes and unloads, and when you then let go of shield, you will not pick up the unloaded bomb, because the game knows that it unloaded. And that is where the camera shenanigans come into play. Many actors stop updating when off camera, and that works to prevent the game from noticing that the pot unloaded. Bombs always update, no matter if on camera or off camera, so unfortunately we cannot pick up unloaded bombs to achieve SRM. That would be really useful if that worked. Okay, with the next two SRMs we will again just store some data to somewhere else in memory for later use, so I will explain it later when we actually use it. Next we need to talk about how the game handles the carrying of actors. Let's use the example of the pod that we do the SRM with. Normally when you pick up the pod, the game will create a pointer to it. A pointer is basically just the memory address of something. So in our example, the value of the pointer is the memory address of the pod. Depending on the context, you can also call it a reference. The pointer is not the pod itself, but a reference to the pod. Now, to create the illusion of Link carrying the pod, the game needs to change the coordinates and angle of it. The pod is supposed to be at the position of Link's hands, so it first looks up where the position of Link's hands are, and then it uses the pointer to the pod to find out the addresses of the pod's coordinates and its angle. So let's say the pointer says address 1000, that is not actually a realistic address for an actor, but let's just say 1000. The game knows that the x coordinate always comes after the first 36 bytes, so that means that the x coordinate of the pod must be at address 1036. And so the game writes the new x coordinate value to address 1036, and that is done also for the y and the z coordinate and the facing angle, and that will make it look like Link is actually holding the pod. But what happens when the pod isn't loaded anymore? Normally the game would just delete the pointer to the pod. That actually would happen if we didn't do the camera shenanigans before the super slide. The game would notice that the pod unloads and the pointer to the pod would just be set to 0. But with the camera shenanigans, the pod is what we call culled. That means that certain updates don't happen to the pod. So when we try to pick it up after it unloaded, as far as the game is concerned, in this context, the pod is still loaded. And when you walk around with your hands up, the data of x, y and z coordinates and the facing angle is still written to where the pod was. So in our example we said the pod was loaded at address 1000, the x coordinate is still written to address 1036 and so on. However, when it comes to the management of the actors on the actor heap, in that context, the game knows that the pod unloaded, and that means that the memory where the pod was is now free to use. So when we walk back into the room with the butts, something else can load to where the pod was. The simplest case would be if another actor loaded to exactly the same address as where the pod was. If, for example, the torch that we want to manipulate would load to exactly where the pod was, we would actually start carrying around the torch. However, displacing actors is rarely useful. Well, it can be. In MM3D, displacing a torch can actually be used to clip into Ka-Fai's hideout. But in our case, we want the torch to load to an address a little bit before where the pod was. And by that we can overwrite some other data of the torch with our angle data. And that is the Light Node pointer. For the SRM we only care about the Light Node pointer. With our coordinates we also write some garbage data which causes the puzzle to be solved, but we don't really care about that. As much as I would love to go into detail with the Light Node SRM right now, wrong warps are coming up soon, and I think it is more important to talk about that first. And I think there won't actually be any time left to talk about Light Node SRM for the rest of the run. Yeah, so I guess I will explain it after the run. We still have a minute though for one or two little side facts. You probably noticed already that every time we have hands up, we walk into the room with the bats twice. The first time we just briefly load the room, and you can hear the jingle that plays when the puzzle is getting solved, but the way in which we approach the room, walking sideways, lets us walk out right after. And that is actually really important, because otherwise we would be stuck in the cutscene playing over and over again, until we either unload the room or drop the SRM. So there's a flag that is normally set to indicate that the cutscene should play, but that flag is then unset, but with SRM we keep setting it for as long as we have hands up. So you have like, I think 2 frames in between the cutscenes in which you have control before the cutscene plays again. And the cutscene playing a second time would also change our angle, because Link is turning towards the door during the cutscene. By walking into the room with the butts twice, with different angles, we can actually execute 2 Light Node SRMs back to back. Both times the torch which we are manipulating is loading to the exact same memory address, so we can manipulate its Light Node pointer again. If the torch would not load to the same memory address, we would always need to do one extra heap setup just to rewind time to 9 PM again. Yeah, I could talk way more about this, but unfortunately, or rather fortunately, we now need to talk about wrong warps. We did already set up some wrong warps for the blue warps later, but of course we also need to get to the bosses in the first place. So for the blue warps we just overrode CNET entrance values directly, but for the warps to the bosses that is not a good option. If you watched some SRM categories of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, you might know the wrong warps in Ocarina of Time where your angle determines where you warp, or the Song of Soaring wrong warps in Majora's Mask where your Z coordinate determines where you warp. We want something similar to that. The way to set this up with Light Node SRM in Majora's Mask is to not glitch the CNET entrance value directly, but to glitch the pointer which points to the CNET entrance value. The thing is, the way in which this entrance data is managed in Majora's Mask is kinda messy, and to be honest, I haven't fully understood it myself to this day. But important is just that for every entrance, as far as I know, there somewhere is a pointer that points directly to it. And by changing the pointer, we simply can make the game look for the CNET entrance value somewhere else. And that is what we will do with the next SRM that we are currently setting up. The entrance we are glitching is Graveyard from day one. So once we glitch that entrance, whenever we exit the grave, we will get a wrong warp. And the destination of the wrong warp will not be determined by Link's facing angle, it will also not be determined by Link's Z coordinate. I really don't mean to bring back any old memes, I swear this really is just the optimal way. The warps will be based on the lower half of the X coordinate of Link's right foot, which makes it the feet warp. It is a little bit obscure, but to set up warps based on Link's angle or whatever, in this context we would need at least one extra SRM. I will explain later why when I talk more about Light Node SRM. So our first wrong warp is coming up, and we intentionally void here just to reset Link's position for a setup. But we're not warping to our first boss quite yet, because we actually still need to do one last position setup and later one last SRM heap setup. But then we are actually done with SRM. So where are we warping? To the graveyard, just from a different entrance. And I need to explain one more important detail related to the wrong warps. It is about how the game handles respawning Link after, for example, voiding, or respawning after the clock tower opening cutscene. In the respawn datasets, the game does not exactly store the value of the entrance from which you entered the scene. Instead it stores the entrance 0 of the scene. So for example, when we enter the graveyard from the day 1 grave, and then watch the clock tower opening cutscene, the game actually stores the entrance graveyard from Icana Road, because that one is entrance 0. Normally this doesn't matter, because to respawn Link, the game only uses the entrance value to check which scene needs to be loaded, and no matter from which entrance you enter the scene, it will always be the same scene. However, it is not necessarily the same scene with our wrong warp shenanigans, so when we exit the grave and the game sets up our respawn data, as far as the game is concerned in this context, we used an entrance to graveyard, and that means that our respawn data says graveyard from Icana Road. Now if we glitched the entrance graveyard from Icana Road, then the game would actually respawn Link based on his right foot X coordinate. Which would be really bad, because we have no control over Link in this cutscene. So glitching an entrance 0 will allow chain wrong warps with voiding or dying. However, since the entrance we glitched was not entrance 0, when we now respawn, where are we landing? In the graveyard, of course. I know this didn't look very spectacular since we already were in the graveyard. However, if we would have wrong warped somewhere else, after the cutscene we would still have been placed in the graveyard. I would have liked to do a position setup somewhere else and then wrong warp back to the graveyard with this mechanic, but there was just no other convenient place. There would have been some alternative coordinates in other scenes that would also have worked for the upcoming SRM, but they all would have spawned us out of bounds in the graveyard. You respawn at the same coordinates that you have right before the cutscene, but we will see a void warp later that we will use to warp back to graveyard. So stay tuned for that. Oh yeah, we also walked to our first boss, by the way, finally. Since we are on the Japanese version, we could use power crouch stab here. We will use power crouch stab later, so I will explain it when it comes up, but for Odolvo the quick spam stab is actually faster. So by attacking Odolvo in a specific rhythm, not too quickly but also not too slowly, you can keep him locked in place. And also I did not really figure out how to do this more optimally. I don't know why, but I had to pause during the quick spins for quite a moment because I could not keep the stun lock otherwise. But you can actually do this way quicker. And as I explained earlier, the blue warp now takes us to Icana Road. Though before we are continuing our boss rush, we are going on a little trip, because there's something neat I wanted to show off. This is the test map. It is a scene that the developers used for testing things, and this scene was later taken out in the North American and PAL versions, but it is still in the game on the Japanese versions. Here we have something that looks like the crawl spaces from Ocarina of Time. They don't actually work though, but maybe until some point in development they actually had plans of integrating crawl spaces in Majora's Mask. And in the center of the map there's this really huge tower. There's nothing up there though, it's really just a very high up platform. We have a little alcove here. In general, there's mostly just a lot of stuff to parkour. And there's some water, of course, and the ladders you see are actually not functional. Maybe they just wanted to see the look of the ladders, or maybe during development someone had a reason to remove the climbing functionality for whatever reason. I don't know. And we have to Zora here from Great Bay Coast. The one that I'm talking to is the one who swims near Pirate's Fortress, and the other one is the one that swims in front of Pinnacle Rock. There are some birds here, and as far as I know, these are not actually used anywhere in the game. Apparently they are not the birds on the moon, and obviously they are not the seagulls from Great Bay. We have some pots here, which each drop 10 deco nuts. But of course we will not pick those up, because that would increase our item count. And everybody who played this game should know these, the moving blocks from Stone Tower. So they did apparently test this mechanic here. Interestingly, you cannot summon elegy statues here. I guess maybe when they tested this here, elegy statues might not have been restricted to Icana. We don't know how things were during development. Oh no, the moon is going to crash. Or is it? As it turns out, the moon cannot crash on the cutscene map. I don't know why, but the time just wraps around to the start of day 3 again. Yeah, so we just got a day reset. And this is the void warp I promised you earlier. The coordinates at which we respawned in the graveyard there are the same coordinates at which we spawned on the cutscene map. Alright, this will be our last SRM heap setup, and it will do several things. We will now use the data we did set up earlier with 2 SRMs, and we will use it to change Link's transformation, but I will not tell you which transformation yet and why. You will see. The other thing which we will use the respawn data for is to unfreeze Goat. The thing is, the flag for Goat being unfrozen unsets when you enter most other scenes. So you might know when you die to a boss and then get back to the boss room later, the boss fight starts right away without any cutscene, and this is the same flag that we are going to set for Goat. However, this flag unsets when you leave the temple, so when you then get back into the temple, get back into the boss room, you will see that the boss fight reset completely and you will have to watch cutscenes again. Earlier we avoided here for the fleet warp setup, but this time we must not do that, because it would unset the flag. We would load a scene that is not Goat's Lair or Snowhead Temple. So this setup is a little bit awkward. By the way, finding setups for feet coordinates is super painful. The coordinates just change every frame, even when you stand still. I really hope that this will never make its way into RTA runs. And I think it's not even that bad here with the platform, because jump slashing onto the platform or backflipping onto the platform gives you consistent coordinates. But doing a feet-based Song of Soaring roam warp would probably not be RTA viable at all. Alright, we are in Goat Slayer, Goat is unfrozen, and we are Fierce Deity. I know this is a little bit lame, but did you know that you cannot stun Goat with just Sword? You can damage Goat with Sword after you got him stunned, but beating him with just Sword is, as far as I know, impossible. So yeah, glitching Fierce Deity was just the simplest thing I could think of to beat Goat. The astute viewer might also have noticed that it is day 1. This was my original plan to get some more in-game time after we beat Odova. It was pretty close to the moon crash, so before I found that you can reset day 3 on the test map, I originally planned to just fix this with SRM. This was also the same SRM we did to change our transformations, so it would not have saved any time if we wouldn't have changed the day. Now I need to apologize for something. We will get our human form back from the blue warp, but we will also not wear the Keaton mask anymore, and I forgot to put it back on for the rest of the run. I'm really sorry for that. Yeah, 2 bosses left, and we did the first 2 bosses in order, so you can guess maybe which one comes next. For this one, the feet warp setup I found is not quite as bad as most of the other ones, but it's still pretty bad, so yeah, I didn't bother optimizing this. And we are in Gaiok's chamber. This boss room actually has 2 different entrances. One where you come through the door and stand at the top, but you can also just warp directly into the falling cutscene. There's actually a cutscene skip here. When you have bow, you can shoot at Gaiok before the fight starts, and for that you would need to warp to the door entrance at the top. But since we don't have bow, there is no reason to not just warp directly into the cutscene. So how do we fight Gaiok? Well, you will see it's actually very simple. First off, we do a jump slash to store damage for power crouch stab. I will explain in a second what exactly that means. And now we get ISG with one of the pots. And now we can basically just side hop into Gaiok, he gets stunned from the ISG. And also we shield damage from him, which puts us in a hover. And then we use the letter, which puts us into a cutscene dive, and we dive to the bottom to Gaiok, and we hit him with ISG. And it's as simple as that. Well, okay, there's a little bit more to it. First of all, when you jump into water, you normally lose ISG. However, with a cutscene dive like this, the sword hitbox is still active for just a moment before you lose it, and it's fortunately enough to land a hit on Gaiok. We actually have to wait a moment before we use the letter for Gaiok to sink a little bit further to the bottom, or otherwise we would not actually hit him. And then there's the thing with the power crouch stab. So in Ocarina of Time and the Japanese versions of Majora's Mask, they somehow messed up the damage value and type for crouch stabs. When you stab, the game does not actually update damage type and value, and this means that the damage you deal with the crouch stab is the same as the last normal slash with a melee weapon. Yeah, I actually had to swim towards Gaiok here to juke him, because if he eats us, we are dead. Anyway, we did a jump slash earlier because a jump slash deals twice as much damage as a normal slash, and because the infinite sword glitch also comes from a crouch stab, its damage also has the stored damage from the jump slash. So this is our 4th hit now, but we need one more. However, there were only 4 pots, so what do we do now? We do something that we already did earlier in the run, and that is using another method to get ISG, and that is interrupting the crouch stab by taking damage, or rather shielding damage. This is the so-called damage ISG. And unfortunately I did not manage to get this without also stunning Gaiok with the crouch stab. So yeah, we need to wait just a moment until he attacks us again. I don't know if it's even possible to not stun him with a crouch stab. Maybe it is, but if it is, then it's probably very precise. And that's 3 bosses down, just 1 more to go. Man, there are still so many little things I would love to talk about. For example, did you notice that we don't have tattle anymore? That was another side effect of the SRM that turned us fierce deity. It's actually an issue that we have critical health, because with critical health in Majora's Mask, if you have 1 heart or less, you cannot walk in a straight line, unless you target. And that also means that you cannot turn around straight, but for my feet warp setup to twin mode we need a 180 turn. So yeah, we just need to farm 1 heart here. Now the feet warp setup to twin mode is one of the few that I found by just messing around. Yeah, actually the only other one I found just by messing around was to the test map. And this is actually a glitched entrance, but it behaves exactly like the normal entrance. The astute viewer might remember that at the very beginning of the LOTAD I promised that there would be an entertaining ending. And I think I already explained everything you need to know to understand what's going on in the twin mode fight. So I will just let the fight speak for itself. And that is twin mode. And time is about to come up soon. And then we still need to talk about Light Node SRM, and maybe some more things depending on how much random stuff comes to my mind. Yeah, by the way, the arena is coded as an actor, so you can just target it for no good reason. And that's the end credits. How did that happen? Well, the astute viewer might remember that we did one extra Light Node SRM earlier to just change the last blue warp. And we did set it to the scene Lost Woods. Not to be confused with Woods of Mystery. In Majora's Mask, Lost Woods is the very first area where you get knocked off Epona in the intro cutscene. And the first part of the intro, where Skull Kid steals Link's ocarina, as well as this ending cutscene we just warped to, are also set in Lost Woods. It might not look like it, but it's the same scene. This part of the cutscene here is set on a hidden floor that is above the area where you get knocked off Epona. Anyway, why are the end credits playing? Well, it's actually quite simple. Normally the blue warp takes us to the last cutscene in the Giant's Chamber, which is cutscene number 3, and we simply replaced Giant's Chamber with Lost Woods. So instead of cutscene 3 in the Giant's Chamber, we got cutscene 3 in Lost Woods, and that cutscene is the very end of the end credits. Okay, now for everyone who still cares, let's finally talk about Light Node SRM. I also still need to justify feed warp, and I want to talk about the differences of Light Node in Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time. First we need to talk about the Light Node pointer, because that's what we manipulate directly with SRM, with our facing angle. The Light Node pointer is a pointer to an entry in a double-linked list. If you want a more detailed explanation of how double-linked lists work, you can do your own research. I will just explain the relevant basics here. So there's a list that holds references to light sources like torches, but also, for example, tattle, or when you slash a wall with sword, for a moment it spawns sparks, which are also a source of light. And even though the torches in the grave were not even lit at first, they still had an entry in the list for whatever reason. Fortunately for us. When the torch unloads, it tries to remove its own entry from the list, so the torch looks up the previous and the next entry in the list, and then it copies the pointer of the previous entry to what the next entry pointer points to, and it copies the pointer of the next entry to what the previous entry pointer points to. I will just put the function in C code on the sidebar. That will probably make it much easier to understand. With SRM we changed the Light Node pointer, which in the code is the variable with the name light, and we change it to point to our respawn data, or held actor data in our very first SRM. To be exact, we want to point it to 4 bytes before the respawn data that we set up. Let's look at an example. This is the SRM for feed warp, and we manipulate the torch. We have the angle 3699. And this means that we write 3699 to the lower half of the Light Node pointer. We cannot manipulate the upper half of the Light Node pointer though, because the facing angle is only 2 bytes, but pointers in this game are 4 bytes, so the upper half of the Light Node pointer stays what it is, and that is 801F. So the complete pointer is now 801F3699. Yeah, unfortunately I did not record any watches for the Light Node pointer itself, but trust me bro. The Light Node pointer is now pointing to the second byte of the X coordinate of the respawn data, so the game will then interpret the following 12 bytes as the Light Node structure. I marked that in blue here. So this means the light info pointer is 3AE91641, which is not a valid pointer format. But it is okay because this pointer is not used anymore at this point. The light info pointer does however null in the function lights free node, which is called here, and you can actually see that happening when the light node triggers. It writes 4 bytes of zeros to the respawn data. Sometimes, if you only want to write 0, this can be useful, and if I remember correctly, you can actually use this in Ocarina of Time to become adult. Anyway, what we really care about are the Light Node pointers, which here have the variable names prev and next. With the given offsets, the pointers are both written to where the other one points to, so we need to set up our respawn data to look like valid pointers. Or null if we only want to write zeros, that's also valid. Let's take a look at our example again, and we do indeed have data in a valid pointer format here. When we go through the function, we fulfill all the null checks, so we reach this line here. The previous of Light Node is the pointer 804000342, and from the Light Node structure we can see that the next comes after the first 8 bytes, so we need to apply an offset of 8 here to our pointer, and the address to which we write here is then 8040034A. And vice versa, once we reach this line down here, the next of light is 801BFF4C, and this time we write to previous, which comes after 4 bytes in the Light Node structure. So we write to 801BFF50. We do not care about the first write here at 8040034A. There is the Z coordinate of Link's right foot, and that is overwritten instantly again. In general, we always only care about writing in one direction, even though we technically get 2 writes. But as long as it doesn't crash, we don't care. And that's also why I always only show the memory for one of the writes throughout the run. That being said, of course, it would be optimal if both writes would be useful. But with our limitations here, that is just not realistic. Anyway, the second write in our example is what we need for feed warp. 801BFF50 is the address of the entrance pointer we overwrite, and at 804003442 there is the lower half of the x coordinate of Link's right foot. So far so simple, I hope. And yeah, this is both the exact same in Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time. But now I also want to talk about the practical limitations that we have here and why we set up Light Node SRM the way we do. So with our current SRM methods, when we manipulate a light source, we can only change the lower half of the light node pointer. And in Majora's Mask, the upper half is always 801F, because the double linked list is in that memory region. And that causes some very unfortunate limitations. For example, the mechanic I described with the light info pointer to just write zeros, that can only be used to write zeros to memory addresses that start with 801F. But the more important limitation, however, is which data we can make the game interpret as the previous and next light node pointers. Again, we can only use data in memory region 801F, and unfortunately the file name in memory is in the region 801E. Or when you create a file, the game actually does some copy pasting, which leads to a copy of the file name to also be in memory. However, that file name copy is then in the memory region 8050. Ocarina of Time is lucky, they have the double linked list and file name both in the same memory region. And that is why you can use the file name for Light Node SRM in Ocarina of Time, but not in Majora's Mask. So in Majora's Mask, what is in memory region 801F that we can use? Well, technically there is a lot of stuff that could in theory be used, but the most convenient thing that I could find was by far the respawn data. But actor data, which we used for the very first SRM, is not nearly as convenient because it does not have the facing angle data. The facing angle gives us so much more freedom because it can have any value. With respawn data we are still a little bit limited though, mostly by the very first byte of the Z coordinate. The 3 coordinates are 32-bit floats, and those usually start with, for example, the byte 40, 41, 42, 43 and so on for positive numbers, or C0, C1, C2, C3 and so on for negative numbers. So somewhere in one of those pointers that we set up, you will usually find one of those bytes. And that is also why we use the coordinates of Link's feet. The pointer we set up to the lower half of the right foot's X position ends in 42. On the North American version we are a bit luckier, there we can simply use Link's normal Z position. Alternatively, you can also look for an entrance pointer that just happens to be loaded to an address that is convenient for the 4041 or whatever, and then you can have total freedom of what you can use for the warps. For example, what we used in the past were Honey and Darling and Swamp Archery. And the warps were based on Link's target angle, so the angle you last targeted on. That is much more convenient than Link's current facing angle, because once you got your angle you can just target once and then you can walk around freely, as long as you don't target anymore. If you want to know more about how to find float perfect position setups, I made a whole video dedicated to that. Well, one more potentially useful candidate to set up data in the 801F region are the coordinates and facing angle of Epona. We have never really actually tried to use Epona data for Light Node SRM, and I totally forgot about it until recently, until I saw Horse Pushy. Yeah, maybe someone should look into that again. Okay, I will stop here. Thanks for watching. Bye.